Ever have one of those nights where everything just feels off? It was one of those nights for Jake, a college freshman back in his quiet hometown for winter break. His parents were out of town, leaving him to hold down the fort. It was a typical small town, the kind where everyone knows everyone and nothing exciting ever happens. But that night, the eerie silence of the house felt almost too quiet, like the calm before a storm. Jake was lounging on the couch, a bowl of popcorn in hand, flipping through channels when the phone rang. He nearly jumped out of his skin. Nobody ever called the landline anymore. He picked it up, expecting a telemarketer, but instead, there was just static. After a moment of silence, a faint, raspy voice whispered, "I'm closer than you think." His blood ran cold, but he tried to laugh it off. Probably just some stupid prank call. Shaking it off, he returned to his movie marathon. Just as he was getting into the storyline, he heard a noise from the kitchen. A soft clinking like metal against glass. Maybe a raccoon, he thought, though his gut told him otherwise. He grabbed a flashlight from the hallway and slowly made his way to the kitchen. The sound stopped as he entered, and there was nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual clutter on the counter. He let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding and returned to the living room. Jake settled back in, but the unease wouldn't leave. He decided to double-check all the locks, making sure the windows and doors were secure. Satisfied, he went back to the couch. That's when the phone rang again. This time, his heart pounded in his chest. He answered, and there was the same static, followed by the voice. "I can see you." Jake's eyes darted to the windows, but the curtains were drawn. He felt a chill creep up his spine. Was this some kind of joke? Trying to keep his composure, he shouted into the phone, "Who the hell is this?" The line went dead. The room felt like it was closing in on him. He hurried to the front door, peeking through the peephole. Nothing. He turned back to see if he left any windows open when a loud knock came from the door. His heart stopped. Who would be knocking at this hour? He mustered the courage to ask, "Who is it?" There was no response, just another, more insistent knock. Jake felt his hands trembling. He grabbed a kitchen knife for some semblance of protection. Slowly, he approached the door, his mind racing with possibilities. Could it be a neighbor? A friend? The prankster? As he reached the door, the knock stopped. Silence. He peered through the peephole again, but it was pitch black, as if something was covering it. Suddenly, the phone rang again. He froze, staring at the receiver. Against his better judgment, he picked it up. "I'm inside," the voice whispered, sending a wave of terror through him. He dropped the phone and spun around, clutching the knife, scanning the room for any signs of intrusion. But there was nothing, just the echo of his own breathing and the pounding of his heart. Then, a shadow moved in the hallway. Jake's grip tightened on the knife, his breath shallow. The shadow grew closer, slowly taking shape in the dim light. Jake's mind raced as he stared into the dark hallway. The shadow seemed to pulse, growing larger and darker as it approached. He steeled himself, ready to confront whatever was lurking in his house. But just as he braced himself, the shadow stopped. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint creak of the floorboards. Then, a light flickered on in the kitchen. Jake jumped, nearly dropping the knife. He edged toward the source of the light, heart pounding. The kitchen light buzzed, casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. And then he saw it. On the kitchen table, his phone was lying there, screen glowing. He didn't remember leaving it there. It buzzed again, another call coming through. Hands shaking, he picked it up. The screen showed an unknown number. He hesitated, but answered. "Who are you? What do you want?" he demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. There was a brief pause, then the same chilling whisper. "You can't hide from me." Jake's eyes darted around the room, searching for anything out of place. But it was just the same familiar kitchen. The voice continued, "I'm in the house, Jake." He slammed the phone down, panic taking over. How did they know his name? He bolted for the front door, but as he reached for the handle, it twisted open from the outside. Jake stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. The door creaked open slowly, revealing no one. Just the empty porch and the cold night air. Jake's mind was in overdrive. Was this some sort of twisted game? He needed to get out, find help. As he made a move to dash out the door, it suddenly slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls. He was trapped. Frantic, he backed away from the door, only to hear a soft, almost mocking laugh from the hallway. He spun around, knife raised, but the hallway was empty. The laughter echoed around him, seeming to come from every direction. The house felt alive with it, a mocking chorus that made his skin crawl. Desperate, Jake retreated to the living room, searching for any possible weapon or escape. The laughter grew louder, mingling with the static from the TV. He grabbed a heavy lamp, holding it like a club. "Show yourself!" he shouted, voice cracking with fear and adrenaline. The laughter stopped. The house fell into an eerie silence. Then, from the shadows of the hallway, a figure emerged. It was a tall, gaunt figure, face obscured in darkness, but Jake could feel the weight of its gaze. The air grew thick with tension as the figure slowly stepped forward, each step echoing through the quiet house. Jake held his breath, every muscle tensed. The figure stopped at the edge of the living room, just out of reach of the dim light. They stood there, silent, an ominous presence that filled the room with dread. Finally, the figure spoke, voice smooth and chilling. "I've been watching you, Jake. Always watching." Jake's heart pounded in his chest as the figure stepped into the light, revealing a face twisted in a grotesque grin, eyes gleaming with malice. Without thinking, Jake threw the lamp at the figure, then sprinted for the back door. He fumbled with the lock, hands slick with sweat. The figure's footsteps were slow and deliberate, drawing closer with each passing second. Finally, the door gave way, and Jake burst into the backyard, cold air hitting him like a wall. He didn't stop running until he reached the street, breathless and shaking. Behind him, the house loomed ominously, silent once more. He grabbed his phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. As he explained everything to the operator, he glanced back at the house, half expecting to see the figure watching him from a window. But there was nothing. The police arrived minutes later, searching the house thoroughly. They found no one, no signs of forced entry, nothing out of place. Jake's parents came home early the next day, concerned and confused by the whole ordeal. But the unease lingered, the fear that someone or something had been watching him, closer than he ever imagined. That night, Jake couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even after the house was locked up tight. He moved back to his dorm room early, unable to stay in the house any longer. The experience left him haunted, always glancing over his shoulder, wondering if that eerie voice and sinister presence would follow him into the darkness. Lisa had always loved the solitude of her parents' lakeside cabin. Nestled in the woods, it was the perfect getaway from her hectic city life. That summer, she decided to spend a week alone there, hoping to unwind and focus on her art. The cabin, rustic but comfortable, held countless childhood memories, and she looked forward to reliving them. The first few days were blissfully peaceful. Lisa spent her time painting by the lake, hiking the nearby trails, and indulging in nostalgic snacks while watching old movies. But as the week progressed, she began to notice strange things. It started with little details, a creaky floorboard, a flickering light bulb, and doors she swore she'd closed left ajar. One night, after a long day of painting, she sat by the fireplace, sketching ideas for her next piece. As the fire crackled and the wind howled outside, she heard a faint tapping sound. At first, she thought it was a tree branch scraping against the window. But when she listened closely, it was unmistakably rhythmic, almost like a coded message. Curiosity piqued, Lisa got up to investigate. The tapping seemed to be coming from the window in the guest bedroom. She hesitated at the door, her heart beating faster. Pushing aside her unease, she turned the doorknob and peered inside. The room was dark, the only light coming from the pale moonlight filtering through the window. There was nothing there. She was about to turn back when she noticed something strange on the window pane. Squinting, she realized it was writing, written in what looked like dust or condensation. The message read, "Look closer." A chill ran down her spine. She wiped at the window, but the writing didn't smudge. It was as if it had been etched into the glass. Feeling unsettled, Lisa backed out of the room, closing the door behind her. She tried to shake off the eerie feeling, convincing herself it was just her imagination. Maybe it was a prank left by a previous visitor or an old message she'd forgotten about. She returned to the living room, but the relaxing ambience had vanished, replaced by a creeping sense of dread. That night, she had trouble sleeping. The wind seemed to howl louder, the cabin's creaks and groans more pronounced. As she tossed and turned, she heard the tapping again, this time coming from the living room. She sat up, listening intently. The taps were sporadic, like someone trying to communicate. Gathering her courage, Lisa tiptoed to the living room. The fire had died down, leaving the room in shadows. She flicked on a lamp and gasped. On the glass coffee table, written in the same strange script, were the words, "Downstairs now." Her breath caught in her throat. The only place downstairs was the old, disused cellar. Lisa had never liked the cellar. As a child, it had always terrified her with its cobwebs and dark corners. Her parents used it for storage, but it had always felt cold and unwelcoming. She stood there, torn between fear and curiosity. Was someone playing a trick on her, or was there something more sinister at play? Against her better judgment, she grabbed a flashlight and slowly made her way to the cellar door. The tapping had stopped, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. She took a deep breath, turned the rusty knob, and pulled the door open. The air that wafted out was musty, thick with the scent of old wood and dampness. She hesitated at the top of the stairs, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. As she descended, the wooden steps creaked ominously under her weight. The cellar was just as she remembered, filled with old furniture, boxes of forgotten belongings, and a few cobwebs here and there. Just as she was about to turn back, something caught her eye, a faint glow coming from behind a stack of boxes. Curious and apprehensive, she moved closer, heart pounding in her chest. Behind the boxes was an old mirror, slightly cracked, reflecting the flashlight's beam. But what made her blood run cold was the reflection of words on the wall behind her, glowing faintly. "You found me." She spun around, flashlight darting across the cellar walls. There was nothing there, no signs of anyone. The words written in what looked like faint chalk seemed to pulse with an otherworldly light. Panic set in, and Lisa dashed up the stairs, slamming the cellar door behind her. Breathless, she grabbed her phone, planning to call her parents or the police. But as she picked it up, the screen lit up with a new message. It was from an unknown number, and it simply read, "Welcome home." Lisa's heart sank. Whoever or whatever had been in the cabin with her knew everything. She grabbed her keys, determined to leave the cabin and drive to the nearest town. As she rushed to the door, the tapping resumed, this time louder and more insistent, echoing through the cabin like a countdown. She threw the door open, sprinted to her car, and jumped in. As she drove away, she glanced back at the cabin, half expecting to see someone, or something, standing in the doorway. But there was nothing, just the dark outline of the cabin against the moonlit sky. Lisa never returned to the cabin alone again. The next time she visited, it was with friends, and they found no trace of the eerie messages. But she could never shake the feeling that something had been waiting for her in that cellar, something that still might be waiting, watching from the shadows. If you want to see more horror stories, check out my next video.